not made, and that if a man's fate was to become President of the United States, it would not matter that he learned to write with a hunk of coal on the back of his shawl. So much the better. It would make him humble. That it might be good for the old image never to occur to me, appropriate, in between writing the third and fourth draft of this introduction. I happened on Norman Mailer's The Presidential Papers. In his introduction, he used a word I have used and said something provocative. And this is what he said. The hero is the one kind of man who never develops by accident. A hero is a consecutive set of brave and witty self-creations. My mother often assured me that there was a silver lining in every cloud and that no failure was a permanent bar to success and that everything always came out right in the end. Late in the Depression, my father lost the store, our house, and our car. I believe this was only the dark before dawn because he died broke. And I decided I had been born an artist. I have lost the orange fountain pen my father gave me for my bar mitzvah, but I remember that he said, "You want to be a writer, write with Eversharp." A roly-poly, button-nosed spinster named Elizabeth Graham taught me high school English. Writers write, she said, paraphrasing Epictetus, and she meant fiction. 10 years later, after I settled in New York City, I returned to Springfield for a visit and called on Miss Graham. "Don't tell me about New York, son," she said. "Tell me, how's the writing?" So my father moved to New York in 1949, 1950, and he wrote Friends and Fellow Students book about the first Peace Corps in India. And he married my mother, Joan Morgan, in 1951, and he had me in 1954, my brother in 1957, and I grew up in New York City. My father wrote 4 books, 2 of them fiction, 2 of them not. He worked for Look, Life, and Esquire and wrote 200 articles. He was the editor of the Village Voice. He was press secretary for Adlai Stevenson and Mayor Lindsay of New York. And he won an Academy Award for writing the documentary on Albert Schweitzer, who, when they went to visit my mother and him, Albert Schweitzer played the organ very well, but he liked women, and he insisted that my mother would sit next to him, and he used to pinch her. That's not in the Academy. So I'm going to fast forward. Dad did a lot of things, president of a radio station, president of organization at the UN, and also memorable but not recorded, stood up at the UN when Salman Rushdie was hiding in London and said he, well, I'll read it. He said, "The poet troubadour Rachel Lindsay was from my hometown, Springfield, and he died there in 1931. He wrote poems meant. What has happened over the years, and I'm 60 now, what has happened is that growing up with these sound bites, which we all have, photographs, pieces of stories, I have discovered, by going back to Springfield, Illinois, and burying my father, I have discovered that I have a whole other side of my family that I didn't know. And I'd like to tell you that story. So I have to sit down for a minute. How are you doing? Good timing. My great-grandfather was named Lewis Morgan. He's right here in the newspaper. And he moved from Eastern Europe, we don't know where, but my father said he came from Romania. So there were 2 stores. I grew up thinking there was only 1 store. Why were there 2 stores? Helene, and Sarah. Effie, Harry, Dave, Helene, and Sarah. Say that with me. Effie, Harry, Dave, Helene, and Sarah. Okay. So Dave marries a woman named, are you following me? I'm practicing this. So Dave marries a woman named Ethel Becker, who, the only thing I knew about her before I went back to Springfield 3 weeks ago was that she died of an infected hemorrhoid in 1982. Okay. Dave had a store, he was married to Ethel, she died. They had raised Helen Ann by himself. And then he fell in love with my grandmother, Mabel. Mabel Ariel Wolf. Zeb was named after Wolf. Zeb and Mabel, story, okay, soundbite. Mabel took one look at Helen Ann. Helen Ann is over there. Susan, would you point to that woman in the white dress, the little baby? That's Helen Ann. Yep, all of those were Helen Ann, baby and grown up. Helen Ann, wait a minute. Mabel looked at Helen Ann when she was 4 years old. Soundbite, sitting on a hooked rug. And Mabel said, send her to the orphanage. And my grandfather did. And then Mabel and Grandpa had my dad, who is everywhere. This is my dad. And my uncle and aunt. So there were 3 children, a wife and a husband. I don't know who those ladies are. I'm moving here. This is my aunt, so I'm moving. Mabel and Dave, right? The Dave. Okay. So I'm moving along. We have only a few more sound bites. What I learned about Helen Ann was that when my grandfather was dying, Helen Ann came to see him, and my father and his brother and sister learned that they had a half-sister, and that she had been living across the street. And what had happened was she didn't go to the orphanage. She had been adopted by Ethel, the hemorrhoid lady. She'd been adopted by Ethel's brother. And then, okay, I'm almost done here. Then, go back to the Effie, Harry, Dave, right? Effie, let's do it again. Effie, Harry, Dave, Helene, and Sarah. Effie married a non-Jew named Walter Gardner, who descends from a slave owner. And Effie's children were Catholics, and 2 of them became nuns. And one of them, two of them became nuns. Now, we learned, when I went back to bury my father, the Gardner family, the Catholic family, lived 2 blocks from the cemetery. And we called them. And for the first time, the Morgans and the Gardners met. And the reason why we never met is due to a soundbite, which was this. Oh, the Gardners, they're like jazz musicians, crooks, and they live on the other side of the tracks. But we learned now from 3 weeks ago that the Gardners were blue-collar workers. They weren't retail store owners. And that they were Catholics, which in my great-grandfather's will, it says if you marry a non-Jew, you don't get any of my money. I don't hold any of these. I hope nobody's taking this. So, I mean, by her uncle, we have the Gardners, who are the Catholics, who we've now reconnected with. And then there's two more pieces. Helen Ann was not given to an orphanage because what really happened, my eyes twitching. What really happened was that my grandmother couldn't take care of Helen Ann, and she abused her by not feeding her. And the courts came and took her away from my grandfather and gave her to the uncle. And she ended up growing up and having a wonderful husband and a wonderful son who I talked to on the phone, who lives in Berkeley. And there's a sadness that from not telling the whole story. There's a sadness from not telling the whole story. And now we're all in touch with each other. And there's one last thing. My father always said, soundbite number finish. My father, I said to any of you in here who's Jewish, you know that you were given a Jewish name. Because we were Reformed Jews, but many people are given a Jewish name. My great-grandfather's Jewish name was Eleazar. And my father, I said to Dad, I said, what is your Jewish name? And he said, my Jewish name is Sarah. And I said, but that's a woman's name. And he said, yeah, I don't understand. I don't really get it. And so I go back to Springfield 3 weeks ago, and I go into the library, and I find out that the Effie, okay, here we go. Effie, Harry, Dave, Helene, and Sarah. Sarah and Helene were riding the trolley one day in 1962. And here's a piece about the geography of Springfield. Is I think the only capital in the United States that has the capital in the center and two railroad tracks going right on either side of it. It's very 19th century. You know, everybody's gotten rid of their train. The train goes right through. The freighter on one side, on the west side of the Capitol, and the Amtrak on the right. When I was there 3 weeks ago, before I went to the library, this is like, you know, Abraham Lincoln, you know, and the trains going through, you know, and the smoke, and the conductors, and, you know, and 1916, day before Thanksgiving, Helene, the two youngers, were on a trolley. They stopped at whatever, there were lights or whatever. The train, it comes through, the trolley stops, the train has a lot of smoke. The conductor gets out, the smoke gets in his eyes. The other train comes and runs right through the trolley. Helene is thrown out the window, and Sarah is impaled and killed. So they named my father Sarah after Sarah. And I didn't know that until 3 weeks ago. So, gosh, that's really depressing. I'm going to read from my book, just the very last line of my afterword, where I say, beholding to my father, Thomas Bruce Morgan, who taught me never to pass up an adventure. Yeah. So the adventure here is to hear the sound bites, to hold them, and to find out what they're connected to. So I just wanted to share that. You're welcome to look at pictures or anything, and we're going to end with some sound bites. Help, Sarah?
Okay.
She's going to, yeah, I'm going to, yeah, I'm just going to do a second one.
And
father was born in 1885 and went to second grade and then went to work. And he had 4 or 5 brothers. Nobody went beyond grade school. And as a matter of fact, when my father went to work, he became part of my grandfather's store, and the name of the store was Morgan's. They thought it was more American to have a name like Morgan. You imagine Moran is a pretty more American name, but they didn't think so, because they thought it meant Morano. That's what happened in those days, people changed their name. And being Jewish wasn't all that easy in the early part of the century. It was not as easy as it is now, let's put that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say the painting was Susan Gurney's painting.
Painting by
The space was Matt Swift's space.